Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this special edition. I'm your host, Karim Fazakri, and before we bring in our guest and start the debate, I invite you to follow this report on the ceasefire brokered by Pakistan on April 8th, which was meant to halt the U.S.-Israeli offensive launched in late February and which was framed as a diplomatic breakthrough. The first high-level engagement between Washington and Tehran in decades, that is. But more than halfway through, the core of disputes remain unresolved. Here's Zahra Frajani.
The confrontation between Iran and the United States is sharpening once again. Tehran has reclosed the Strait of Hormuz only hours after reopening it on Friday, citing the continued American naval blockade on Iranian ports.
The Strait of Hormuz has returned to its previous state after the United States broke its commitment and the naval blockade continued. The Strait of Hormuz will remain under strict control and close monitoring by our armed forces unless the United States guarantees full freedom of navigation for ships traveling to and from Iran. The situation on the Strait of Hormuz has reverted to its previous condition and will remain so as long as Washington does not commit to ensuring the free movement of vessels to and from Iran.
The move was reinforced politically by Iran's first Vice President Mohammad Reza Aref, who said Tehran considers the management of the strait as legal sovereign right, stressing that it will pursue this objective through negotiations or on the ground. The renewed closure was quickly followed by security incidents at sea. Maritime sources reported that Iranian naval units fired at least 2 commercial vessels attempting to cross the strait. Shipping monitors said 2 Indian flagships were forced to retreat after coming under fire, while British maritime authorities reported that Iranian Revolutionary Guard boats opened fire near a tanker and another vessel northeast of Oman. In Washington, President Trump warned Tehran against what he calls attempts to blackmail the United States, vowing a firm response if Iran continues to block the strategic passage. Yet despite the escalation, Trump says talks with Tehran are progressively well and promised an update on negotiations later in the day.
We'll be talking about Iran later. We have very good conversations going on. It's working out very well. They got a little cute, as they have been doing for 47 years. Nobody ever took them on. We took them on. They have no Navy. They have no Air Force. They have no leaders. They have no nothing. Actually, their leaders are, it is regime change. You call that enforced regime change. But we're talking to them. They wanted to close up the strait again, as they've been doing for years. And they can't blackmail us.
However, Tehran signaled no immediate diplomatic breakthrough. Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Saeed Khatibzadeh said no date has been set for the next round of talks with Washington, accusing the U.S. of adopting an extreme approach and violating previous commitments. With maritime tensions rising and diplomacy stalled, the Strait of Hormuz is once again emerging as the focal point of the confrontation between Tehran and Washington.
To unpack these fast-moving developments, I'm joined tonight by a distinguished panel. We will be having Dr. Yvonne Ridley, who joins us from Glasgow. She's a renowned journalist, British author, and Middle East commentator, as well as Workers' Party parliamentary candidate. Dr. Yvonne will join us shortly. And from Los Angeles is Professor Sierra Knock, U.S. foreign policy analyst and former Donald Trump campaign insider. Professor Knock, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. And from London is Dr. Irfan Raja, political analyst and media specialist. Dr. Raja, good to see you and to have you with us again.
Likewise, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And from Dhaka is Dr. Gregory Simons, geopolitical analyst and researcher. Dr. Simons, good to see you again and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Karim. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. All right, of intent versus optics. Let's turn now to the Washington side of the equation. And here, let's talk to Professor Sierra Knock. So you technically know the Trump political operation intimately, and the president is saying the conflict is, and I quote, very close to being over, and that Iran wants to make a deal very badly. Yet, simultaneously, the Pentagon Iran maintains maximum pressure and threatens airstrike. Iran's parliamentary speaker just said the president made 7 claims in an hour. All 7 were false. So how sustainable is this negotiating strategy when we have one side fundamentally rejecting the other's version of reality?
Well, I would say the negotiating strategy hasn't changed. The military pressure has increased each time Iran tried to extend the talks, delay, or reject U.S. demands and go back on agreements. The U.S. posture has stayed remarkably stable, though, from the beginning, back when we were negotiating with the now deceased Iranian regime leaders in January and February. They rejected U.S. demands, tried to play games about the location of the talks and delay tactics, and President Trump sent the Armada as a warning. They didn't heed the warning, and President Trump used the Armada and deployed U.S. air power to decimate Iran and take out the unreasonable leaders. Now what we're facing since the war has progressed so successfully is a fractured regime in Iran, which issues public statements that don't always match their private negotiations. President Trump and his team understand this, and they've been gracious on this issue. But the Iranians may be coming up on a limit here because, when they go back on their agreements, because today President Trump called the Secretary of War and the Vice President to the Situation Room.
Mm-hmm. Now, if this strategy, Professor Anak, if the pressure is the strategy, where are the tangible results? Are we any closer to a deal on uranium or the Strait of Hormuz than we were 2 weeks ago?
Well, I understand why the term coercive diplomacy has been used, but I don't think it fully captures what President Trump is doing here. Because at each point, he's given the Iranian leaders the chance to make their own choice, agree to U.S. demands and live or die with their fanatical leaders. Many chose to survive and negotiate, which is actually progress. So in a sense, it can't be called coercive as the Iranians made their choice. But we're currently dealing with leaders who made a choice to negotiate, which I think was the right decision. And ultimately, the uranium and the Strait will be handled, I have no doubt, even if we must resume military operations. But this wasn't a failure. We've never had Iranian leaders who were willing to meet at such high levels with the Vice President of the United States before. And we learned a great deal about this leadership, which can serve as a framework to work off of with the next set of leaders, if these ones happen to be eliminated. Additionally, as the Department of War has repeatedly laid out, Israel and the United States have degraded the Iranian threat for decades to come, and as well as the internal suppression mechanisms that the regime uses, which will benefit the Iranian people at the appropriate time in the future. And we've also strengthened alliances in the Middle East and revealed the true nature of this Iranian regime, which is that neutrality doesn't protect anyone from their chaotic aggression. So this has led to strengthened security, defense partnerships across the Gulf states, and they've never been more unified. And this will support security for decades to come.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor Nak. And now let's widen the lens a little bit beyond Washington and Tehran. The gap, which keeps widening actually internationally, at least between the two parties. But there is also a parallel divide opening up in the United States. And for this, I would like to go back to Professor Sierra Nak. We're seeing what some call a MAGA mutiny, a report, and we have seen a lot of news like Tucker Carlson accusing the president of breaking his America First pledge. Alex Jones as well says Donald Trump is in free fall. That's how he put it. And polling shows 61% of Americans disapprove of the president's handling of this war. And you've been yourself inside that political machine. How serious is this fracture, according to you, within the MAGA coalition? And with midterms looming, is the Iran policy becoming perhaps an electoral liability that could cost Republicans control of the Congress?
Well, it's a good question. I would first say the MAGA divide, or so-called, is mostly led by fringe podcasters, some of whom you mentioned, and these are not people necessarily in the know. But there is a valid concern about the failure of the about the upcoming midterms due to the economy and the gas prices. But I would say that the failure is in the messaging, not President Trump's national security strategy, because we often forget how badly President Biden damaged the world order by allowing rogue regimes like Iran to grow with unchecked power. President Trump was voted in because the American people wanted security, whether that be at the border or on terrorism or on nuclear weapons. So what you're seeing isn't a full-blown fracture. It's a debate about how to interpret America first, not a total rejection of it. But I think the president, was elected, this Iran policy is something that he's mentioned throughout his campaign. And it actually falls under the same priorities he's laid out, which is protecting Americans. So reminding people to take pride in our military strength and seeing America become an energy superpower, providing the world with oil and gas again, are actually positives for voters. And I think once the Iran conflict is resolved, that the voters will be left with pride and not fear. But the timing and the messaging is really key for this to turn into a political victory.
But Professor Sierra-Nak, are you saying that there is no internal backlash actually happening?
Well, there is some, but I think, in American national security decisions are the domain of the president. So we vote somebody in, we're entrusting them to make these national security decisions throughout their term. And President Trump's policy is fundamentally about stopping nuclear weapons from falling into the hands of rogue terrorists, which is good for Americans, but also the world. And his next move will depend entirely on how Iran responds. So I think, the backlash or the divide that we see, it also depends on how Iran responds and what President Trump needs to do next.
Thank you indeed. And now let's move on to fast in this economics. And now let me turn to Professor Sierra-Nak. Professor, who breaks fast in this economic standoff and the crisis we're seeing? Do you think the energy markets are the ones who are going to break first, or the political resolve of the leaders involved?
Well, as we've discussed, there are global economic consequences, but I believe them to be short term. And the United States can weather them. It's not pleasant, but we're not in a dire circumstance. So I think President Trump's resolve is incredibly strong. I think he maintains the most leverage over Iran that we've ever had. And the Iranian regime, it does not have leverage when it comes to their economic position. Their country is they were in a dire economic situation before this started due to their leadership funding terrorism instead of funding their people. And it's only gotten worse with the blockades and, other economic consequences. So I think there's got to be somebody in the Iranian leadership who recognizes that, and that they'll see the value in negotiating. And I really hope they make the right decision for their country and for their people.
Thank you, Professor Sierra-Nak. As we are nearing the end, I would like to Gregory, and to you as well, Dr. Irfan. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, we reach the end. So